The security camera timestamp read 6:47 p.m. on a Thursday evening in late October when Isabella Price ran through the doors of Iron Brotherhood Gym like someone was chasing her. Because someone was. She didn't know it was a men-only facility. She didn't see the sign on the door, the one that had been there for 17 years, weathered and faded but still legible. Members only, male exclusive training facility. She didn't notice the absence of women in the parking lot, or the particular weight room atmosphere, or the fact that every single person who turned to look at her when she stumbled through that door was male. What she noticed was the door. A way in. A barrier between herself and the man who had been following her for 3 blocks. The man whose name was Tyler Brennan. The man who had put her in the emergency room twice. The man who had sent 247 text messages in the last 6 days, each one escalating from pleading to threatening to something darker that she couldn't name but recognized in her bones as dangerous. The man who had just found her leaving work. Isabella had a restraining order. She had changed her phone number. She had moved apartments. She had done everything the advocates told her to do. Everything the police suggested. Everything that was supposed to keep her safe in a system designed to protect people like her. But Tyler Brennan did not care about restraining orders. And now he was on the sidewalk outside, 30 feet away, his face visible through the glass door, his eyes locked on hers with the particular intensity of someone who believed he owned what he was looking at. Isabella stood just inside the entrance of Iron Brotherhood Gym, her back against the wall, her breath coming in sharp gasps that hurt her ribs, the ribs that had been fractured 4 months ago, the last time she'd believed him when he said he was sorry, that he'd changed, that it would never happen again. She was shaking so hard her teeth chattered, and that's when she heard the voice. "You okay?" Deep. Calm. The kind of voice that didn't rush, didn't panic, just stated facts and waited for answers. Isabella turned her head. The man standing 6 feet away was enormous, not tall in a basketball player way, but built like something designed to endure. Broad shoulders, arms covered in tattoos that disappeared under the sleeves of a black tank top, a beard going gray at the edges, and eyes that were taking in the situation with the methodical attention of someone trained to assess threats. He was looking at her, then at the door, then at the man on the sidewalk, then back at her. "No," Isabella whispered. "I'm not okay." The man nodded once, not surprised, not judgmental, just acknowledgement. He walked past her, not hurried, not aggressive, just steady, and positioned himself between Isabella and the door, between Isabella and Tyler. He didn't say anything. He just stood there. Through the glass, Tyler's expression changed. The predatory confidence faltered. He looked at the tattooed man blocking his view of Isabella, at the leather vest draped over a nearby bench with patches that said things Tyler probably recognized even if he didn't fully understand their meaning. At the 15 other men in the gym who had stopped their workouts and were now watching the door with the particular attention of people deciding whether to get involved. Tyler stood on the sidewalk for another 30 seconds. Then he turned and walked away. Isabella watched him disappear around the corner. She waited. He didn't come back. She let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped in her chest for 6 days. Maybe longer. Maybe 4 months. Maybe 2 years. The tattooed man turned around. "He gone?" he asked. Isabella nodded. She couldn't speak. Her throat had closed up completely. "Good," the man said. Then he looked at her more carefully, at her scraped palms, at the bruise on her wrist that she'd tried to cover with a long-sleeved shirt, at the way she was holding herself, small, defensive, ready to bolt. "You hurt?" he asked. "No," she said automatically. Then, more honestly, "Not right now." He nodded. "Okay, I'm going to get you some water and you're going to sit down for a minute, and then we're going to figure out what happens next. Sound good?" Isabella looked at him, at this stranger in a gym she'd run into without thinking, who had placed himself between her and danger without asking why he should, who was offering her water and a chair and a plan like those were the most normal things in the world. "Okay," she said. What Isabella didn't know, what she couldn't have known, standing there in the entrance of Iron Brotherhood Gym with her heart still racing and Tyler's face still burned into her vision, was that the man helping her was named Jackson Reaper Cole. That he'd been a member of the Hells Angels for 28 years. That he had a daughter who was 24 and a nurse practitioner in Portland. that his daughter had, 3 years ago, left a relationship that looked very much like the one Isabella was still trying to escape. That he had spent those 3 years wishing he'd noticed sooner, wishing he'd been there, wishing he'd stood between his daughter and the man who hurt her the way he'd just stood between Isabella and hers. That he'd promised himself that if he ever saw it happening to someone else, if he ever had the chance to be the person who stopped instead of the person who wished he'd stopped, he wouldn't hesitate. Isabella didn't know any of that. She just knew that for the first time in 2 years, someone had put themselves between her and Tyler Brennan, and that person wasn't leaving. 2 years earlier, Isabella Price had been the kind of woman who laughed easily. She was 28 years old. She managed a bookstore in the Pearl District of Portland, a small independent shop called Open Pages that specialized in literary fiction and poetry and had a cafe in the back where people could sit for hours without anyone bothering them. She was good at her job. She remembered customers' names and their reading preferences and could recommend books with the particular accuracy of someone who actually read what she sold. She had friends. Real friends. The kind who showed up when you needed them and who called on Tuesday nights just to talk about nothing and who remembered your birthday and your mother's birthday and the anniversary of the day your father died. She had an apartment in southeast Portland that she shared with a cat named Virginia Woolf. She had a bookshelf so full it required strategic stacking. She had Sunday morning farmers market routines and Tuesday evening yoga classes and a life that was small and specific and entirely hers. She met Tyler Brennan at a reading. He was charming. That was the first thing everyone said about Tyler. How charming he was, how easy to talk to, how interested he seemed in everything you had to say. He came to the reading for a debut novelist Isabella had been excited about, and he stayed after to talk about the book, and he was smart about it in a way that didn't feel performative. He genuinely understood what the author was doing. He had thoughts, good thoughts. He asked Isabella for coffee. She said yes. The first 3 months were everything Tyler wanted them to be. Attentive without being smothering. Romantic without being overwhelming. He texted good morning and good night. He showed up at the bookstore with lunch when he knew she'd been too busy to eat. He listened when she talked about her day. He made her laugh. He made her feel seen. Looking back, and Isabella had done a lot of looking back over the last 2 years, she could identify the exact moment things shifted. It was a Tuesday, 4 months in. She'd gone to dinner with her friend Rachel, and she'd mentioned it to Tyler that morning, and he'd said, "Have fun," and she'd thought nothing of it. She came home at 9:30. Tyler was waiting outside her apartment. "You said you'd be home at 8, he said. "I did?" Isabella tried to remember. "I don't think I said a specific time." "You did. You said dinner was at 6 and you'd be home by 8. She hadn't said that. She was certain she hadn't. But Tyler's face had a look she didn't recognize, something tight and controlled and not entirely rational, and it was easier to apologize than to argue. "I'm sorry," she said. "We stayed later than I expected. I should have texted." The tightness in Tyler's face relaxed. "It's okay. I was just worried. I thought something happened to you." She should have noticed it then. The first crack in the facade. The first glimpse of what was underneath. But she was tired from dinner and happy to see him, and it was easier to accept the apology than to examine the moment too closely. The cracks widened slowly. Tyler started texting more frequently. Not just good morning and good night, but check-ins throughout the day. "Where are you? Who are you with? When will you be home?" Casual questions that felt less casual each time. He started commenting on her clothes. Nothing harsh, just observations. "That shirt makes you look available. Those jeans are too tight for someone in a relationship. Maybe don't wear your hair down when you go to work. Men might get the wrong idea." He started monitoring her phone, not obviously at first, just picking it up when it buzzed, just glancing at the screen, just asking who's texting you in a way that sounded curious rather than controlling, until it didn't sound curious anymore, until it sounded like an interrogation. Isabella's friends noticed. Rachel noticed first. "He's texting you a lot," Rachel said one afternoon when they were supposed to be having lunch, but Isabella had spent 20 minutes responding to Tyler's messages. "Is everything okay?" "Yeah," Isabella said. "He just worries." About what? Isabella didn't have a good answer for that. She started seeing her friends less. Not because Tyler forbade it. He never forbade anything, that was the clever part. But because it was easier not to deal with his mood afterward. Easier not to answer questions about where she'd been and who she'd talked to and why she needed friends when she had him. She stopped going to yoga, stopped going to the farmer's market, stopped doing the small things that made her life hers, and started building her life around Tyler's schedule, Tyler's preferences, Tyler's increasingly specific requirements about what she could do and where she could go and who she could be. The first time he hit her, it was 10 months in. They'd been arguing. Isabella couldn't even remember about what later when the police asked her to write it down in the report. Something small, something stupid, something that shouldn't have mattered. Tyler's hand came up fast, not a slap. A punch. Closed fist to the side of her face, right at the temple. Isabella dropped. She hit the floor of her own apartment and tasted blood and felt the room spin and thought very clearly, "This is the end. This is the moment I leave." Tyler was on his knees beside her immediately, crying. Actually crying, tears running down his face, hands shaking as he reached for her. Oh my God, Bella, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean, I don't know what happened. That's not me, that's not who I am. Please, please, I'm so sorry." And Isabella, sitting on the floor with her head ringing and blood on her lip, made the worst mistake of her life. She believed him. There's a script that plays out in abusive relationships. Experts have documented it. Advocates have named it. The cycle of abuse. Tension building, acute explosion, reconciliation, calm. Round and round. Tension building. Tyler would get quiet, withdrawn. His texts would become shorter, colder. He'd pick at small things. Dishes in the sink, her tone of voice, the fact that she'd smiled at a customer at work. The air would get thick with it, the feeling that something was coming, that something was wrong, that she needed to be careful. Acute explosion, the punch, the shove, the hand around her throat, the screaming in her face, the things thrown, the door slammed, the fear so absolute it erased everything else. Reconciliation, the apologies, the flowers, the tears, the promises that it would never happen again. The explanations. He'd been stressed. He'd had a bad day at work. His father had been abusive, and he was trying so hard not to be like that, but sometimes the anger just took over and he was so sorry. Please don't leave. Please give him another chance. He loved her so much. She was the only good thing in his life. Calm. Days or sometimes weeks where things felt almost normal. Where Tyler was the person she'd met at that reading. Charming, attentive, thoughtful. Where she could almost believe the explosions were anomalies. Where she could almost convince herself that if she just tried harder, loved better, stopped doing the things that set him off, it would stay calm forever. It never stayed calm forever. The cycle repeated, again, and again, and again. Isabella tried to leave 4 times. The first time, she packed a bag while Tyler was at work. She got as far as Rachel's apartment. She stayed there for 3 days. Tyler called 89 times. He showed up outside Rachel's building. He sent flowers to the bookstore with a card that said, "I can't live without you." Rachel told her not to go back. Isabella went back. The second time, she made it 6 days. She stayed with her mother in Seattle. Tyler found out somehow. Isabella still didn't know how. And drove to Seattle at 2 in the morning and stood outside her mother's house calling her name until the neighbors threatened to call the police. Her mother told her not to go back. Isabella went back. The third time, she actually called the police. She filed a report. She got photographs of the bruises on her ribs, her arms, her throat. She sat in a police station and told a detective everything while a victim's advocate sat beside her and took notes and handed her tissues. The detective told her she had a strong case. The advocate helped her file for a restraining order. They gave her resources, shelter information, safety planning, a hotline number. Tyler was arrested. He spent 1 night in jail. He was released on bail. He called her from outside the jail at 7 in the morning and told her that if she testified against him, he would make sure she regretted it for the rest of her life. The charges were dropped when Isabella refused to cooperate. Her advocate told her not to go back. Isabella went back. The 4th time, she almost died. It was 4 months ago. July, the hottest day of the summer. They'd been arguing. About what? Isabella couldn't remember later, because the specific cause never mattered as much as the underlying reality, which was that Tyler's control over her had become absolute, and any deviation from what he expected triggered rage. He choked her. Not for the first time. But this time was different. This time he didn't stop when she started losing consciousness. This time his hands stayed on her throat and his face went blank, and she understood with terrible clarity that he was going to kill her. She doesn't remember how she got away. The memory has gaps. There was her throat closing. There was the feeling of drowning on dry land. There was the certainty of death. And then there was her neighbor's door. She doesn't remember getting there. Doesn't remember knocking or falling or the neighbor calling 911. She remembers waking up in the hospital with a doctor explaining that she'd been strangled nearly to the point of death, that the bruising on her throat was severe, that she was lucky to be alive. She remembers the police coming again. The same detective as before, the same advocate. She remembers for the first time in 2 years, not going back. Jackson Cole got the nickname Reaper when he was 24 years old and had been riding with the Hells Angels for less than a year. It wasn't because he was violent. Wasn't because he had a particularly dark reputation. It was simpler than that and stranger. He'd been on a run through Montana, part of a group of 15 riders, when they'd passed a car accident on a rural highway. Fresh. Maybe 5 minutes old. A sedan had gone off the road and hit a tree. The driver was still inside, unconscious, trapped by the collapsed frame. The other riders had slowed but kept going. It was policy, most of the time, not to get involved in situations where law enforcement would ask questions. But Jackson pulled over. He pulled over and he got the driver out before the car caught fire. He pulled over and he probably saved the guy's life. Later, back at the chapter house, one of the older members, a man named Knuckles who'd been riding since before Jackson was born, looked at him and said, "You pulled death away from that guy, like you were reaping in reverse. Guess we should call you Reaper." The name stuck. Jackson didn't mind it. There were worse things to be known for than pulling someone away from death. He was 52 now. He'd been Reaper longer than he'd been Jackson. 28 years in the Angels. 28 years of runs and chapter meetings and charity events and all the complicated machinery of belonging to something larger than yourself. He owned a gym. That was the thing people found surprising when they learned it. Big tattooed biker, president of the local Hells Angels chapter, running a gym. But Iron Brotherhood had been his for 17 years, and he'd built it from nothing into something that mattered. It wasn't a commercial gym. No spin classes or yoga studios or smoothie bars. It was a serious training facility for serious lifters, powerlifters, strongmen, fighters training for amateur MMA. The kind of place where the weights were heavy and the equipment was simple, and if you needed someone to teach you how to deadlift properly, there were 5 guys who could show you the right way. It was men only. Not because Jackson had anything against women training. His daughter Kira could deadlift 315 pounds and had competed in 3 powerlifting meets. But because he'd opened Iron Brotherhood at a time when men's spaces were disappearing, when everything was being co-opted and commercialized. And he'd wanted to build something that felt different. Something that acknowledged that men, too, needed places to be vulnerable. To fail. To push past their limits without performing strength for an audience. It had worked. The gym had a waiting list. Membership was by referral only. You didn't just show up and join. Someone had to vouch for you. Jackson was training on the evening Isabella ran through the door. He'd been doing deadlifts. His 3rd working set, 425 pounds for 5 reps. When she burst in looking like every nightmare he'd had since Kira left her ex-boyfriend 3 years ago. He recognized the look immediately. The fear. The desperation. The way she'd positioned herself against the wall like she needed something solid at her back. And he recognized the man on the sidewalk. Not personally, but the type. The posture. The particular way he was looking at Isabella, like she was property that had wandered off and needed to be retrieved. Jackson didn't think about it. He just moved, putting himself between Isabella and the door, between Isabella and the man outside, letting his presence, the size of him, the leather, the patches, the reputation, do the work. The man left. Jackson turned around and looked at the woman he'd just protected without asking permission. She was young, late 20s, maybe 30. Dark hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, jeans and a sweater and sneakers that had seen better days. Scraped palms like she'd fallen recently, a bruise on her wrist visible when her sleeve shifted, and eyes that had seen too much. He'd seen those eyes before, in Kira, in other women who'd come through the chapter's charity work, in the mirror on the worst days of his own life, when he'd been the one doing damage instead of preventing it. "You hurt?" he asked, because that was the first question. Always the first question. No, not right now. The honesty of that answer, not right now, which meant at other times, which meant this wasn't the first incident, hit him harder than he expected. "Okay," he said. I'm going to get you some water and you're going to sit down for a minute and then we're going to figure out what happens next." She agreed. Jackson walked to the back of the gym, where they kept a small office and a mini fridge. He grabbed a bottle of water. He texted Kira. "Had a situation. Woman came in fleeing her ex. Handled it. She's safe. We'll explain later." Kira texted back immediately. "Is she okay?" Jackson looked at Isabella through the office window. She was sitting on a bench near the entrance, her arms wrapped around herself, staring at the door like the man might come back. "Not yet," he texted, "but I'm working on it." Isabella stood in the doorway of Reaper's house on a Saturday morning in July, holding a box of books. "Where do you want these?" she asked. "Living room, left side of the bookshelf." She carried them in and started unpacking. She'd been moving in gradually over the last month. First a drawer, then a shelf, then half the closet. Now books and kitchen supplies and the accumulation of a life being integrated with someone else's. It was terrifying. It was also wonderful. Reaper appeared behind her. "You good?" "Yeah. Just thinking." "About what?" "About how different my life is now. 18 months ago, Tyler was in my life. I was scared all the time. I didn't know how to trust anyone. I thought I was going to die alone and afraid. And now? Now I'm moving in with a biker who owns a gym and watches terrible movies and makes me laugh and stood between me and the worst thing that ever happened to me without asking for anything in return." Reaper wrapped his arms around her from behind. "Sounds like you upgraded." Isabella leaned into him. Significantly. They stood like that for a moment. "I love you," she said. "I don't think I've said that yet, but I do. I love you too, even though I'm still a mess sometimes." "You're not a mess. You're a person who survived something terrible and came out the other side. That's not the same thing." Isabella turned around, looked at him, at this man who had changed everything. "Thank you," she said, "for stopping, for seeing me, for staying. You already thanked me. Eddie, I'll keep thanking you, for the rest of my life if I need to." Reaper smiled. "I can live with that." Later that day, after they'd finished unpacking, Kira and Hannah came over for dinner. They sat on the porch, the same porch where Isabella had sat on Thanksgiving 18 months ago, and ate too much and laughed too loud and talked about books and powerlifting and the community health clinic and the reading series Isabella was organizing at the bookstore. At one point, Kira looked at Isabella and said, "You're good for him, you know. He's good for me." "I know, but I mean it. I haven't seen Dad this happy in years, maybe ever." Isabella felt warmth spread through her chest. Later, after Kira and Hannah left, Isabella and Reaper cleaned up the kitchen together in comfortable silence. "You know what I realized today?" Isabella said. "What?" "I didn't check the door once. I didn't scan the street for Tyler's car. I didn't tense up when I heard a motorcycle. I just existed, normally, without fear." Reaper stopped drying dishes and looked at her. "That's everything," he said. "I know. You did that, not me, not the trial. You. You chose to heal. You chose to trust again. You chose to build something new instead of staying in the wreckage of what Tyler destroyed. I had help. Yeah. But you did the work." Isabella set down the dish she was washing, turned to face him. "I love my life," she said. "I didn't think I'd ever be able to say that again. But I do. I love my job and my friends and this house and you and the fact that I can stand in a kitchen without being afraid. I love that I survived. I love that I'm here." Reaper pulled her close. "I love that you're here too," he said. They stood in the kitchen holding each other, and Isabella thought about the night she'd run into Iron Brotherhood Jim, about how terrified she'd been, about how certain she'd been that her life was over, that Tyler would never stop, that she'd never be free, about the man who'd stood between her and danger without hesitation, about the slow, careful work of learning to trust again, about the difference between surviving and living. She was living now, really living, and it was beautiful.